What's going on, guys? It's Hi with the Upper Left USA, and today we are taking a look at the Nikonos II, particularly how to load and unload film into this camera. So here is our Nikonos II. So to begin this tutorial, let's pretend that I'm first going to be loading film into this camera. To learn how to load and unload film into this camera, you have to first understand how the lens mount work, and how to mount and dismount the lens, because that is a critical part of loading and unloading film into this camera. With this particular camera, the lens itself is actually holding the body together, and to get access to the inside film compartment, you have to first take the lens off. The first thing that I want you to take note of is the little silver pin on the top and bottom of the lens mount. This essentially acts as a counter twist mechanism on this particular lens mount to prevent the lens from accidentally twisting and coming off during use. If you look at this particular design, it's pretty apparent that the silver pin is attached to the lens, and it sits inside a groove that's cut out into the body itself on the lens mount. So to dismount this lens, what you essentially want to do is to take this lens, pull it forward, and just twist to get the pin out of the groove, and that essentially releases the lens from its counter twist mechanism and pretty much how it's mounted onto this body. So let's demonstrate that now. Like I said, all you have to do is pull the lens forward and twist to get it out of that groove. And let's try that. See, pulling it out of the groove and just twisting. And the lens comes apart. So I just want you to be aware that this process can be a little bit difficult trying to remove this lens from the lens mount, as this O-ring is on there pretty snugly, and this is essentially how your camera remains waterproof. From my experience, if you're having a hard time turning the lens or just getting it off, moving it back and forth in a rocking motion really helps to release this seal and dislodges this lens. So now that we have the lens off, we can just set it aside, and now we can work on removing the top half of the body from the bottom half. So like I said, this camera body actually consists of two different pieces, the top half and the bottom half. To gain access to the inside of this body, we essentially have to pull this top plate out from this bottom canister. And again, this can be a little bit difficult like the lens mount, because there's actually an O-ring sitting around this entire top plate, which prevents water from leaking in between these two camera parts. So I have to admit that I struggled for a little bit trying to figure out how to remove this top half from the bottom. Logically, if you would just look at the camera, it's pretty obvious that these nubs are there for a reason. So I figured that I would just try to push up with my fingers, but that proved to be a little bit too difficult because the O-ring is just really tightly held in place. So I played around with the camera for a little bit, and then I noticed these little hooks on the end of the strap lugs itself, and then it became pretty apparent that these hooks essentially act as a can opener. So you just slip it up under these nubs and push up, and the top plate is released from the bottom. From here we just separate the two pieces, and this top half is where we actually load the film into. Okay, so now let's actually load film into our camera. To do this, all we have to do is take our film canister and load it onto the left. And as you can see, this little bottom piece is actually on a hinge, so just be aware of that. Just slip the film canister onto the left, and the bottom piece flips out and holds the film canister in place perfectly. From here, take note of this film pressure plate. It flips up and down and essentially just acts as a mechanism to hold the film flat once it's inserted into the body. Also take note of the cutout in the take-up spool on the right side of your camera body. This essentially is just a place for you to slip the film leader, this cutout piece of the film, into, and it just helps to guide the film forward. So at this point, I'm just going to lift up this film pressure plate, pull my film over, and slip the film leader into that cutout on the take-up spool. So from here, I have to teach you a little bit more about this camera if you have no idea how to use it. On the top plate is your film advance lever. If you push it in, it cranks forward and advances your film. And as you can see, it kind of just rests in place once you advance the film. And if you press it in again, the shutter actually fires. Also located on the top plate is the safety lock. So if you advance your film, again, it just stays in place right there. But if you have the safety lock down, it prevents you from accidentally firing the shutter. I just want you to be aware of this safety lock feature if you're having issues with this aspect of using your camera. So back to loading film into our camera body. Again, we have the film leader inserted into the take-up spool, and from here you just want to advance the film using that lever that I showed you. And as you can see, the film is being pulled forward and wound into the take-up spool. At this point, we can just lower this film pressure plate and essentially reassemble the camera. One thing that I like to point out about reinserting this top half back into the bottom half is to just be aware of where you're putting pressure. Obviously, you don't want to put too much force onto the safety lock, the film advance lever, the shutter speed dial, or anything that might be able to break. So I personally just like to put all the force on this flat part of the top plate, making sure that everything is seated properly and that the top half and bottom half are tightly held in place so that no water gets into the main compartment of the body. So the last thing that we have to do in reassembling this camera body is to just remount this lens. To do this, we just reverse what we did to take the lens off. So to start, insert your lens with the pins to the left and right of the camera body. Add some pressure and just turn it until the pin seats into the little cutout groove. Okay, we are almost done loading film into this camera body. All we have to do now is to advance the film until it reaches the first frame of the roll. If you turn the camera upside down, you'll notice a little window. This is your film counter window, and it tells you how many shots you have taken, how many shots you have left. And like I said, the last thing that we need to do is to just advance the film into the first frame of the roll. This is a little bit difficult on this camera because, as you can see, the numbers increase in increments of 4. So to get to the first frame, it's kind of just a guess and check method. You just have to learn over time. So from here, just advance the film, take a shot, flip it upside down, and guess where it is at. And for me, it's past 0, so that's good enough. And that is how you load film into the Nikonos II. So let's pretend that I've taken a bunch of shots, and I'm at the end of the roll, and I want to unload film from this camera. To do this, you want to turn the shutter speed dial to the red R, which stands for rewind. Now all you have to do is take the film rewind crank located on the left of the top plate, flip it open, and start winding your film back into your film canister. As you can see on the film rewind crank, there's actually an arrow indicating which way you should be turning the lever, which essentially is just clockwise. You should be aware that you have to pull this film rewind crank up past the top plate in order to actually rewind the film back into the canister. If you have it lower, it actually will not do anything. As you rewind the film back into the canister, you'll notice there is some tension, and once this tension ends, you'll know that the film is released from the takeoff spool and is back into your canister. Once the film is fully rewound, you can just put the film rewind crank back into its home and disassemble the camera again to unload the film, and you are now completely done. And that was my tutorial on how to load and unload film into the Nikonos II. And I have to admit with you, this is probably the most difficult camera that I've ever had to load and unload film into. And that's not because it's an overall hard process, it's just that the camera itself requires a lot of steps before you can even get into the film compartment. And you really have to know how to use the camera to load and unload film, which is really different from other cameras where you just have one button. Maybe you just press this button and the latch open and you have access to the inside of the camera. This is the first time that I've ever actually seen a lens or the lens mount holding the entire camera together. So that was quite interesting. I remember the first time trying to load film, I just could not figure out how to open this thing up. And like I said, I actually had to find the manual to learn how to do that, which is quite interesting. One thing that I'd really like for you to keep in mind is the O-rings on this camera. When you have your camera open, just check them periodically, make sure that they're not torn, ripped, or damaged in any way. If they are, just replace them. Because remember, that's how your camera stays waterproof. If they're broken and you take this underwater, there may be some issues, and I don't think anybody wants that. So just be aware of the conditions of your O-rings. So this is a little bit weird to say considering that you've come this far in the video already. And by watching this video, it most likely means that you already own a Nikonos II. But for those who are just watching this video for the fun of it, or you're just interested in the Nikonos line in general, I would recommend you to save some money, don't buy the Nikonos II, and buy the Nikonos 5. To me, the Nikonos 5 is just an overall better camera than the Nikonos II in form, function, and pretty much every other aspect of a camera. And since we were talking about loading and unloading film in this video, I would have to say that doing that is much easier on this camera, as it's one of those cameras where you just essentially press this button to release the lock and turn this knob and you have access to the main compartment. Much more simple than using the Nikonos II. I hope this video has helped you out and now you're able to go and take photos with your camera. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, share it, comment down below with any questions you may have. Thank you for watching this video. I'll see you guys in the next one.